Meeting test. Meeting test. Yes. then possibly. Hey, how's it going? Hey. All right. We'll go ahead and officially call this town council work session for August 20th, 2024 to order. And I do want to acknowledge that Councilman Gant is participating remotely. And Councilman Gant, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So with that, if you would please join us on our nation. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. We got a few things on the agenda for today. We'll go ahead and roll into it. Financial advisor introduction, debt financing presentation. Mr. Antoine Morrison, Finance Director.
Thank you. We have here today with us DEC, Defining Emerging Concepts. DEC is our new financial advisors. As you recall, last year we went out to issue debt October. And one thing I realized is that our former financial advisor, we had been with them for 20 years. And so doing our due diligence, we wanted to go out for RFQ, so we did. We had 4 bids to come back. DEC won. Very professional with the team. We have Doug Carter, Andrew Carter, and Jeremy Carter. So Andrew is the director, Jeremy is the managing director, and Doug is the president of the company. Doug started the company roughly 20 years ago. One thing that you'll learn about Doug is that he's going to bring a lot to the table for us because of his experience. He is a former deputy state treasurer for the LGC, as well as the former finance director for the city of Charlotte. And so a lot of different ideas, a lot of experience, probably have 100 years worth of experience sitting back there. And so we're excited to work with them. I think we've met with Sean, we've met with Randy, and they were very pleased with them. So we're just looking to get the work started. There's a lot to do. And so today what they're going to do is give you a presentation of who they are, what some of their plans are. No concrete definitive answers are needed today. If there's something that you want us to look at, we would love to hear that, because we would like to come back sometime this fall with more concrete information for you. But this is introduction, philosophy, and some recommendations for things that they've seen thus far. So I'll turn it over to the partners.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to the best way with the fancy wand here. The slides. So thank you very much, Antoine, for the introduction. You saw a couple of my bullet points already, and it'll make some of my slides a little quicker today. But thank you for having us. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and most importantly, we appreciate the opportunity to serve the town and your financial advisors. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to take the first couple of slides, which is an introduction to our firm. And Doug's going to go into some other concepts about planning, and Andrew will wrap up our presentation today, getting into some of the specifics of modeling. He is our modeling guru, so he's the youngest of us, so you can tell he's the computer skills. First thing, I just wanted to do a little introduction on us. First, here on the left-hand side, we're going to hit some left-hand side of the slide. We're going to hit some of the, kind of key points of the importance of a financial advisor and their services to the town and other issuers around the state. So the first thing is, and this is something that DEC really prides itself on, is that we like to be an extension of the staff. We're here throughout the process, planning when it comes to the issuances and the rest. So we really want that partnership to be a strong one. I did want to point out that we are SEC and MSRB regulated. We are all licensed, operating in the positions that we have. We all have our Series 50s, and Doug and I have Series 54 as well. And that's a great protection to the town. So we definitely have rules that we must follow to hold our license and to have our firm operate in this space. And that's really a protection to the town. It's a great thing for you to have because we have to act as your fiduciary and we have a duty of care. So when we get into talking with banks or other individuals related to financings in this future, we're always on your side of the table. We have to protect you. That is our job. And that's what we take very seriously. So going over to the right-hand side, kind of what is our modus operandi? This is one of Doug's favorite terms. He loves modus operandi. And you just heard this already. We're very proud that we're 20 years in at this point. Firm's been very successful. We have the great honor, I'll call it, of being #1 advisor in North Carolina if you look at total volume by issuance over our 20-year history. We have the honor of working with Greensboro, Asheville, Charlotte, Raleigh. This is just to name a few. We do everything from the large cities to the coastal towns. Beach renourishment is what it is, primary thing. So we kind of see things across the state. It gives us a very unique perspective, seeing all of those different ideas and programs. Our firm also did the first COPS and LOBS issuances, either as the firm or members of the firm. We did first special obligation bond and many other firms, including draw programs and the like. So for depth of staff experience, once again, Antoine took a couple of my speaking points, but Doug has been here in the state, working in the state for many years. Was the CFO or finance director of the city of Charlotte, worked for the local government commission, and has run public finance offices for many of the large firms. I worked majority of my career, I guess, or coming up to equal with Bank of America and its predecessors, Nations Bank and the like. And Andrew, I said, our guru of the computer. He's a Chapel Hill grad, so right here local, and does all of our great work, those functions. So if you want to point out or look at one point, I would direct you to the last one on the right-hand side. We are planning first advisor. There are some folks in this industry who come in when there's a deal to be done. So we're not a deal first advisor. We are really about planning and getting things in the future. Move to the next slide. Importance of financial planning. You're going to hear a little bit more about this throughout the presentation, but we're going to be looking at achieving objectives, revenues and cost balancing. We're going to look at plan for funding into the future. Is that debt? Is that pay-go? Kind of what you do to make that balance. We have to always kind of keep in mind what LGC likes. We must approve everything here in the state of North Carolina, but also what the rating agencies like. We want to keep here high ratings. Annual reviews will be part of what we do. So as we get the models complete based upon the priorities of the board, we will then continue through time updating these models to actually plug what were the rates we actually got on a particular rate. Because we're going to model them conservative, but then we'll put it actually in there. That may kick out some additional resources that we need on other projects. We're going to look at taking time to influence end of the year after. We'll make sure that everything is updated. So once again, resources and priorities can be balanced.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
You mentioned pay-go, and I see that coming back in further on in the deck on the several slides. Can you define pay-go for me, please?
Pay-go would be using cash you have on hand.
Okay, so pay as you go.
Pay as you go,
Okay, right.
instead of debt funding, pay-go funding.
Okay, so just general operating expenses.
Correct.
Okay.
And you have strong financial standing. We have great relationships with the agencies, given all the places that we represent around the state. It makes us have great relationships with the agency. So we're going to talk a little bit later in the deck about the increased use of planning tools, budget, financial policies. It's going to be really big. And we need to just kind of continue to solidify what the priorities are and what we need in order to accomplish the highest level of planning. And, I'm just going to say, we want to defend the ratings, and you guys are already doing a great job. I mean, y'all are way ahead of the game already. So that's a great place to be, and you should be very proud of that. Here. I'm sorry, what'd you say? Yeah, you should be very proud of yourself. This is the last slide I hit on, but just some key takeaways. Y'all are moving in the right direction, capital and debt planning. We're going to continue to help work with you on that, along with your team here on staff. We're going to have two components of the capital improvement plan. It's a current idea. There'll be a general government and water and sewer electric utility funds. So we'll look at balancing those resources and needs. We're going to talk to you guys about setting aside capital reserves, allocations of utility, and once again, getting back to that pay-go structure, the percentage of pay-go you may want to look at. So as I've already said, you got a lot to be proud of there. On the debt affordability side, I'll try to go quickly here. The third bullet point, I want to just point out, meeting those high quality credit criteria, that's something we spend a lot of time on. And all the agencies over the past couple of years have been changing their criteria. It's a moving target. Some of them are out of comment right now, haven't actually been put in place. Some have. We've seen certain entities around the state who had the highest quality ratings get downgraded. Not because they changed years, not because they did anything wrong, but simply because the criteria changed. And so that's something we always have to keep our eye on the ball on. We can't control it. There's nothing we can do to control it, but it is something that always needs to be thought about. And we will also, as part of our services to you, we will always be looking for refunding opportunities anywhere that we can save the town some money that can have allocations moved to another place. Is one of our primary objectives. So that is the two slides I was going to kick off with, and from there, Doug is going to.
Actually, before you go, so on the capital plan, you mentioned general government and the utilities. Is there a reason that we don't include our Parks and Rec capital improvement plan, or is that's covered under general government?
That should be covered.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are existing, the street improvement, general government, integration. We have existing capital government project funds. Those are just kind of like grouping them.
Right, got it.
Any other questions as far as that
No,
one?
I'm good. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing about where Jeremy was on about ratings. I've been around a long time to look at ratings and think about what ratings are. And I think one of the important things that we should do as we work with you is get out in front of what those ratings are. Y'all were one of the first towns in this state of your size to get AAA credit ratings. In the old days, when I was city finance director, and I'm going to tell you how many years ago that was, you really had to be a big city to get a AAA credit rating. It was all about the size, the complexity, the ability to be flexible. But that has changed a great deal over time. And Apex was one of the first to achieve AAA credit ratings for a city at that time when you had them, I should know better, but was 50 or less thousand people. So I think that is a real check mark for you. And you have several things going for you in terms of credit ratings that I'm going to talk to you about a little bit as we get into this. Okay? Debt profile. You don't have a lot of debt. Now, it feels like a lot. And when I say you don't have a lot, that's because You don't have a lot when you compare yourself to others of your size or larger. And so just really quickly, I wanted to talk about where you were at the end of June 30 and just talk a little bit about things that may be coming. As you can see, your GO debt voted is about 79, right at $80 million. That debt pays down very rapidly because the Local Government Commission requires a 20-year amortization on a level principal basis. So essentially in 10 years, you pay off half the debt. Compared to your mortgage, which you do as a level payment over 30 years, and you don't have half of it paid off until 20 years. And so that payment structure inside the general obligation debt means you pay it down fast. Now, when you pay it down fast, what does that mean? You get to issue more debt if you properly allocate resources and put your money in the right places. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then you have installment financings. Those are installment contracts. They generally are privately placed. You're going to do some public offerings of an installment purchase when we get to what's anticipated. And then you have a very small amount of your electric enterprise debt. It's amazing to me that you've done such a good job to maintain an electric system that is not heavily debt burdened. Now, I know there'll be some needs in the future, but right now, 8 million in debt is almost like no debt for that. Also, in your water and sewer enterprise, you have just over 38 million in debt outstanding. I'm just going to say this to you. The partnership that you have in your region, and I know you partnership with Kerry and perhaps others, but that connection is an incredible benefit for this town because it has brought down significantly your cost. If you go to your two sister/brother towns that are near you, their debt to be issued for water and sewer is going to be considerably likely higher than yours. And so this also gives you a great benefit in terms of your rate setting, what the rates will be, how those rates will inform people who want to come to this town not only to live, but to do business. And so all of those things are going to be positive as you go. What's currently anticipated is sometime in the spring, we'll issue limited obligation bonds, LOBs. I probably should have spelled that out. A limited obligation bond is an installment financing sold to the public. Okay, and it is a limited obligation for you. Now, it makes it sound like you get to make a choice on whether you pay the debt service or not. You don't. The way that it's issued, unlike a general obligation bond, where, you know, North Carolina is so great on these things because there's an unlimited taxing power to pay GOs. There's no limit on how much tax you can levy to pay GOs. But on limited obligation bonds, you simply issue those, you have a debt service payment similar to GOs, rapid repayment. And it basically says that you make a commitment to appropriate for that money every year. You make an appropriation obligation. If you fail to appropriate and don't make the payment, you're not going to issue any more debt in any of our lifetimes because nobody will trust you to make the payment. And so bottom line, although we refer to it as a limited obligation bond, you got to pay it. And so it has to be factored into your debt planning as if it were as heavily covered as general obligation bonds. And then we have a remaining GO authorization from year 2027 of 4.5 billion that we probably do in 26 is what we're thinking now. That'll all be done based upon expenditure schedules, progress of projects, things of that nature. And then we're looking at a rolling stock installment purchase that may come during that time period. Now, that isn't all of it. There's likely other things to come. And I know that's one of the reasons we're going to come back later in the fall is there's more identification of what that might be and over what time periods it might be. I'm a big old numbers wonk, and I love urban places, and you live in an urban place called Wake County. Wake County is currently just over 1.2 million people. Nobody ever thought there'd be a county in North Carolina that was a million people. Nobody, 20 years ago. nobody ever thought there'd be a city more than 1 million people, and there is, called the city of Charlotte. The city of Raleigh is 500,000 people. It'll be 1 million before you know it. The current projection by the state is that by 2050, this county will be 1.9 million people. I think it'll be over 2, is my guess. So where are a lot of those people going to be? Kind of where you all are. The really place where people want to live. With growth comes all kind of need for operating cost and debt from that standpoint. Okay. We're going to be talking to you over time about moving to what I like to call the next level of financial planning. And I'm going to go through that in 3 or 4 slides. And then we have done a little work on affordability analysis. And we're going to talk about how that works. But bottom line is why do you move to the highest level of financial planning, I guess, in our book? Well, for number one, you're AAA rated. And if you're the highest rated, you need to go to the highest level of planning, right? And you have an enormous, I shouldn't say enormous, a great amount of growth coming to your area, and how you manage that growth will be a great part of ratings, cost of government, cost of utilities, things of that nature. So what are the drivers to really move to the next level? First is things like efficient utility rate setting. And y'all are in the process now of looking at rate setting in your water and sewer utility and how that will be paid for in a price efficient manner. There'll be capital asset needs, both from a growth perspective, and what we really can't forget is the more you grow and the more you have, the more it depreciates and has to be fixed and has to have investments made to keep those assets free. Obviously, aiding of economic development is something that you would want to look at in terms of moving to the highest level of planning. Need for longer term planning, things of that nature. I'm trying to do this, Mr. Manager. I was told before we got here that if we got done in less than an hour, we would get a check mark. So I'm going to try to get us through in way less than an hour.
We have snacks.
We have snacks. Who cares about planning, for goodness sakes? Well, obviously the community at large, and by that I mean people who know North Carolina, people who know West County, people who know the town of Apex. The Local Government Commission cares, a unique entity in the 50 states. Are you all aware of why it got formed? The city of Asheville, then the largest city in the state of North Carolina in the 1920s, declared bankruptcy. Most people don't know that. And when Asheville declared bankruptcy, the rumor is the mayor jumped out of a window, but I don't know if that's a rumor. If you've been to City Hall, it's this gorgeous structure that's high enough. If you jump out of the window, you do some damage. But the bottom line is the LGC was formed during that time period to say, this is never going to happen again. We're advisor to the city of Asheville, and we were there about 5 years ago when Asheville got its first AAA credit rating from Moody's Investor Services, kind of the hardest one to get it from. And we stood before the council in this unbelievably gorgeous room in that 1920 City Hall. And and the mayor is one of my favorite people. And so she says, so why is this so important to me, us, and how long does it take to get this and all of that? And I said, well, Madam Mayor, 100 years ago, you went bankrupt. You just got your AAA credit rating. So it takes 100 years. And once you get it, you better keep it, because if you lose it, getting it back is harder. Get it back the second time is much harder than getting it the first time. Rating agencies care, holders of your debt care, and then finally your residents and your ratepayers care. How do we get to the highest level of capital and debt affordability planning? And I think in my next slide, I'm really going to talk about, for the next one, I'm going to talk about something that I want us to get thought to. Do we evaluate capital-related sources all in one place? Is there a central place you can go for? Is there a way to measure the percentage you invest in capital and the percentage you invest in operating costs, and are those percentages compatible? Fair. Correct. how do you activate the CIP? The CIP is this wonderful planning tool that y'all deal with all the time. But until you spend enough money, it's only a plan. And I like the word activating the capital plan. And that is saying, when I was with the city of Charlotte, we used to put out this capital book back then that was that thick. God knows how thick it is now. And a big chunk of the projects wouldn't be funded. They simply didn't have a funding source. And so really the activation of the CIP plan is to see how you pay that, either for pay as you go, for borrowed sources, active grant applications, things of that money. How do we really get that capital plan done by getting the money to invest in it? And I will say one thing about debt affordability. Andrew will mention it later, but I'll say quickly. Timing is everything in debt affordability. We all tend to think that it's all about interest rates, right? It's really not. It's when do you spend the money? And activating a capital plan is as much about timing of the expenditure and layering of those expenditures as it is to what those projects are. I'll just finish with this. What about the accomplishments and the needs that come out of going to the next level? It gives a greater standing of your plans. It gives plans standing, and it gives transparency to all the three people that are so important to you. And it's the best of the best. And with proper planning and activation of the CIP and debt affordability modeling, you really get the buy-in by you guys. Because y'all are the ones that set the priorities, appropriate the money, set the tax rate. So it's all important, all about buy-in at all levels. In the water utility, I'm going to go sort of fast on this till questions come. Y'all have hired a very fine firm to help you look at rate setting, rate methodologies, alternative ways to look at rates, methods for fairness in rate models that you do and rates that you put in place with your budgets. I think that is so important for how you look at that. And inside that, and we talked to your staff about that, primarily Antoine, embedded in that rate model will be a debt affordability model. You ought to be able to sit in a room like this one, where we're doing work in a work session, and look at rates and say, we're looking at rate increases potentially of X in the next X years. What happens if we raise that rate by 1%? How much more investment does that give us in our water and sewer utility? And even more importantly, how much does that cost the ratepayer? And how does that compare to equivalent cities, towns, and folks that are your peers? And so the ability to do that in an interactive, sitting right there while you're doing it way is very, very important. And that's why the work that you're doing now with that firm will say a lot about giving you as the council, as well as the staff, all the information that's necessary to say, how do we set rates? Does that put us ahead or behind? What happens to invest? Things of that nature. I'll say one final time. Your need for investments in capital assets in issuance of debt is going to be better than a lot of people who live near you.
Why are we calling out water and sewer rates? Like what problem are we solving? Because like from what I think I know, I'm more concerned about our electric utility than about water and sewer. So why are we specifically calling out water and sewer here and none of the other utilities?
We had more time to look at water and sewer because there are not a lot of municipal utilities. So it's really about water and sewer is easy to look at. We really haven't had the time to sit down and go through that.
Right, because we have, I know, challenges on waste collection, right?
Exactly.
We have challenges on electric and our contract with electric cities that we're anticipating spikes. Right, so water and sewer would kind of be the lowest on the list as far as the concerns. So, but that's the one that we're calling out here. explicitly.
And to expand on that point, that Doug just made, we're also looking at the water and sewer utility because of upcoming debt needs. Because we know with the project that everyone knows about, that we keep talking about, there's gonna be a significant need there. And so making sure that we can afford it, and there's certain things, if we're going to issue that debt, we're gonna have to do. And so that's the only reason that this one has been called out and not the electric utility at this point.
And so do we include like developer fees in the rate assessments, or is this purely usage?
There would be fees other than usage, absolute fees in terms of development oriented fees, things of that nature. But you do know that we've had a lot of litigiousness on that behalf. And there's been tons of changes in how those fees are assessed or levied through a water and sewer utility system. And so you'll spend a great deal of time, and then here again, I'm back to water and sewer. You'll spend a good deal of time with your rate consultant on those exact issues.
So Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, like just last year, we completed that analysis on water and sewer rates, including developer fees and all of that. So it feels like, are we doing the same thing again? Is that a reassessment of the plan that we saw last year, or I'm just kind of trying to connect the dots.
We're not redoing our capital reimbursement fees this time. I mean, they've got those every 5 years. So we did those, and then they're set now until we.
I do remember we also had a conversation during one of the presentations where we were all, at least most of the concerns about including, preparation for these projects in potentially higher. So I think, that's something that they previously had not considered, that we were just going to be issuing that. Maybe that's a piece of the picture, but it doesn't have to be all of it. Right. So I think this potentially include that piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, and okay, and that's kind of what I was hoping would come out of this, that we're, because like some of these investments we know are 7-8 years off, right? So what's kind of the roadmap to getting there? So that's, it's not just a massive debt financing at that point. It's like, can we build up the reserve, to some level, right?
That's where your affordability planning comes in. See how much debt do you really need? How much can you afford, first of all, and then how much do you need to actually issue? And what can we do to offset some of the debt issuance for the future?
And how do you time it? Because timing is everything in affordability.
One thing that when considering your capital reimbursement fees, when you're looking at future projects, you have to look at, there's a couple of different methods to use. When you look at future projects on your capital plan, you have to, if it's a $10 million project, you can only count 75% of that cost. You have to take a cost reduction of 25%. But if it adds 2 million gallons to your capacity, there isn't a reduction taken on that capacity. So what happens, you can actually lower your capital fees in the numbers. So sometimes you're better off to wait and do the project and realize the cost, because that way you get the full cost in the numerator and the denominator is not.
Right, but that shouldn't stop us from planning for that expense.
But I agree.
Right.
I'm just saying, as far as how we set our capital reimbursement.
Exactly, right. And so you schooled me on that last year when we had that conversation. So I remember that. But again, like, we know that the expense is coming, right? So again, I'm trying to stitch some separate conversations together. So this is really more the long-term planning, right? And then capital reimbursement fees are just one, piece of the puzzle.
One component of that,
Right.
and it's so highly controlled by the legislature. The folks that pay that spend a lot of time talking to folks about what should be done about it. And so there's been a considerable amount. I'll give you one example. 4 years ago, the city of Asheville gave up our client in their water utility, gave up 15% of their revenues because the way they had levied their development fees was found inappropriate by the court. lost 15% of the revenues just off the top of the plate and had to make those revenues back in 5 years or so and kept our high credit ratings going with it. So I think the point of, on all of these fees, we just have to be very watchful of how they change over time. And we have to, which is why building a debt affordability portion of your rate setting will give you the capacity to think about, if we lost some of them because of the statutory change, how would we deal with that? It will give you an integration of data and rates and things of that nature that will be an unbelievable tool. One final thing. This is the final thing I want to talk about to say to you. Counties are more like this than cities. You are very close to the county of Chatham. So fun driving through it, get here. They've been our client for 20 years. They were the first county in this state to implement what was called the Capital Investment Fund. Counties generally tended at that time to appropriate everything through a general fund and didn't separate their capital assets and resources from their operating ones. And so what would happen is you paid down debt service, guess what would happen? That money would creep back over into the operating budget. And the next time you wanted to issue debt, the money that you were paying on debt had crept back into operating costs. Cities have tended not to be functioning quite that, everything through a general fund. Y'all have not. You have a debt service fund. You shepherd and guide that debt service fund, I think, in a very good way. But I think one of the things that we'll be talking to you about later more is should we think about a capital, or what is now referred to generally as a community investment fund? And everything that you're going to spend on capital flows through that fund. Now I'm talking about general government now, not enterprises. And by doing that method, is it easier for you to plan on how you put assets in there? What is the affordability of all those revenues inside that model? How do you choose between pay-go out of that fund and borrow and grants? We found it a very important tool, and we'll be talking with you more about that. I just think it's really important for cities and counties to say, here's capital, here's operating. And then you can figure out how those costs get factored in through your funding sources.
How would we do that? Because like we specifically carved out capital budgets because we wanted the utilities to be self-funded, right? And so if we're now going to lump them in the general funds, capital planning, you're kind of losing that.
Well, we would never put enterprises in with the general government.
Okay. Enterprise.
Those have to be separate. This here again, parks, recreation, general investments. You can sub-fund in some of our counties within the community investment fund. You can look at sub-funding. A lot of counties look at school sub-funding because it's such a huge part of the budget. You could look at some sub-funding for parks and recreation if you wished to do that. So there's multiple ways to do that. It's just you take your enterprises have to be separate because they have to be set up that way under state law and by generally accepted accounting principles. In your general government, you do it based on your choice. And we'll talk to you more and more about that. We'll show you specific examples, things of that nature. It's time to go home, isn't it? Okay, Andrew, you're next. Folks, I'll let the one else.
All right, fun stuff, right? We've had a lot of ethereal kind of theory and how do we get from place to place, but how do we actually put the pen to paper and get there, right? So what do we got to do and what? Here we go. So, it went my way. Yeah. All right, so
Let's pass that. That was that's it.
there we go. The debt affordability model. What is it and how do we get there? essentially, as we've been talking, y'all have a utility enterprise, you've got an electric enterprise, and those tend to churn all their own fees and structures and expenses all in one place. It doesn't leak out into the other budgets, right? You're not putting general fund dollars into the electric or utility fund, and if it has surpluses, it isn't usually supposed to leak back over into the general fund side. As it builds surpluses, it builds its own fund balances, and years where it has expenses that are too high, it may have to use its own fund balances. And so what we're essentially going to do here is create a small general government enterprise, a budget within your budget. And the way we can do that is very similar to your enterprise systems now, is we have to have some dedicated revenue streams. And so if we can dedicate some revenue streams, just like you would have in another enterprise system, then we can use that to be the place that we start to project and start to be able to look at, plan multiple budget years into the future. As you can see in your operations budget, you can do some projections. There's a lot of stuff that comes in and out of budgets for operations that may be one-time type of things, or you may have some growth and some changes in salaries and this, that, and the other. And so what we're going to try to do is separate those two things. So as Doug said, year over year, as debt service would go down because of the way the local government commission requires you to issue debt, every year your debt service payment goes down, right? And so traditionally what would happen is we've got a couple $100,000 of new money in the budget that we can program somewhere else, right? Well, we're essentially need to somewhat stop that practice, as dedicated revenues are for debt service. Any overages or surpluses will stay in that capital fund. And any expenditures that we have to do above that will come out of its own fund balance. So we'll basically create its own internal wheel, and it's a self-contained, it doesn't leak out until the other budget. And we can do that by taking your kind of current budget that we have now and saying, what if we kind of freeze what we're doing? You know, what if we have the revenues that y'all are dedicating from the general fund into the debt service fund to pay those bills every year? What if we kind of froze that at the levels we're doing now and kept that going from now on? So instead of having that adjust every year and have it maybe going down on current debt service, what if we kind of stop it where it is? And now we have a revenue source that we can churn inside a technical enterprise type of fund that we do. So, you know, that's what we start off with. I used to be a teacher, so I like to stand up next to the board and point at things. So if that's distracting, please let me know. But you know, where do we start? We have to start with what you're doing now. As Doug said, you've already issued some debt. You got to pay it, right? And so we got to stick with, well, what have we already issued? So we can project all of that debt out of what we've already issued. Then we can put in a pay-go type of. We have this year's pay-go budget that might be supporting some programs. We can freeze that level, or we can look at projecting it out into the future on some other levels. And then what we also do with the debt model is we start then layering in a bunch of our what ifs. What are our new debt service plans and projects? What are additional pay-go projects we might have into the future? Some of these pay-go and debt service projects may not be named. It may just be, here's our capacity. Y'all have upwards of X amount of money that you can spend, and y'all get to choose how to spend it. And so there may be a pay-go budget every year, and y'all can choose to spend up to that amount or below, and anything that's below falls back into the CIF model, doesn't fall back out into the operational side. And so what this essentially does for us is allow us to project things out using the assumptions, conservative assumptions that we have on growth of revenues, interest rates into the future. You know, as Doug said, timing is the greatest driver, because the model essentially hedges out spikes in interest rates, because we're going to be looking at them at 5 and 5.5%. So when we come to you and say you can afford a specific project that may not be for 2 or 3 years, we're going to be looking at debt levels or interest rate levels pointing out higher than what it might currently be, so that we can feel confident and say, y'all can afford this at 5%. And when we actually go and issue it, it comes out to a 3.5 or 4% rate or 2% rate or whatever it is. Now the model just got better, right? Because we were assuming it was going to be a 5% rate. So the assumptions that we have in the model really drives what your ability is to do. So we're going to have assumptions on growth in your revenues. We're going to have assumptions as far as what's your tolerance and risk levels. At what point does the fund balance get too low in that fund before you, as I say, how low does it go before you say no? That's going to give you your ability to say we can or cannot do projects. So once you have the kind of skeleton that we're building of the debt affordability model, it creates the ability to do basically unlimited what if analysis. So once we have the revenues and what you're doing now, we can project out what possibly will be occurring in the future. We can now throw a whole bunch of what ifs. Currently, the what ifs are some of the projects we have. A law coming up, the GEO is coming up. There's one more project, some equipment or some other projects as well. And so we can go ahead and put those into the model and say, when can we actually afford them? And if we want to afford them sooner, what might that cost to you be? And so as Doug said, we can sit in these meetings. Y'all can throw what if scenarios to us left, right, and center. Well, what if that project goes up $10 million? What if we push it a year? What if we change the order and priorities of projects? On the fly, we can give you that information or be able to tell you what it may cost you in the future in order to do so. In 3 years, you might have to have some additional revenue into the model. Do we find that in current budget's operations, or do we need to find other sources on which to do so? We can give you plenty of heads up in order to plan to get there. So the document is really this living planning document that you have, that you can throw what if scenarios out. You can be able to tell the public when they might be getting some of these projects and when you can afford them. And it really just gives you the talk about statistical analysis, where we can also look at the ratings. So we can look at what your levels of debt are now and project it into the future, where you might be as you have debt pay off and add on additional debt to the future. Is that going to threaten a AAA rating? Are we too high on debt? I will say that these models, rating agencies look at them. They give a big gold star, because as Doug was talking about before, when you're talking about CIP plans, it's a great, pretty book. Most of them aren't actually funded. Here's our recommended spend, but we don't really have funding sources besides financing or PAYGO or whatever it might be. This would be able to tell you when we can actually do it. We would issue it between January and June of 2027, and that's when it's going to happen. If things change, that is usually only positives to the models. Let's see if I can get this in the right direction. There we go. So, capacity is something we talk about in the debt model, and that means what extra can you do with your particular revenues you have dedicated. So we have projected revenues that we get. We can project out certain expenditures with usually higher than market rate interest rates and expenses. And then what happens? What actually happens when we get there? Projects tend to move slower than we think. We think we're going to issue it in April of 2027. Gosh darn it, we weren't able to get the plans done, and that was actually July or August, a couple months after or 6 months after. Well, that will help the model. The timing of when you issue something, moving a project by 3 or 4 months, can have a great impact on the model because of when debt service might be hitting that actual model. As we saw, issuing money between January and June gives you full debt service the next year. Issuing between July and December only gives you half debt service in that particular year. So just moving something just a month or two could really help out. Actual debt costs lower than projections. We hedge these models left, right, and center with higher interest rate costs and low projections of growth of revenues. Actual revenues come in better than projections. That's basically your current budgets now. Expenses high, revenues low, and hopefully by the end of the year, those two have kind of come together and you're not having to use any fund balance. And of course, rapid debt reduction and other factors. That gives us the new capacity. So we are able to show you what you can do with the money that you have dedicated. But then afterwards, because it's a living document, we put the final numbers in, the model just got better. So now you're able to do a little bit more that produces new capacity.
Sorry to interrupt. So where does policy come into play, right? Because we've had conversations where, we have certain policies that we're trying to adhere to in terms of, our appetite to accept, a certain level of debt repayment service as part of our operating budget. There's a percent of total taxable value that we set aside, that is kind of the upper limit of our debt service total, right? And the two are not necessarily in line with each other, right? Like, the 2.5% is much higher than what we would ever, we would go by that 12% mark, right? And so policy has a huge impact on capacity, right? And so from where I'm sitting, I'd like to understand a little bit more about, okay, like how do our current policies align with similar communities? We just said things like, your overall debt is very low, but the town is growing, right? And so how do we align our financial forecast with our growth forecast to determine, are we on the bubble right now? Like, are we looking at a huge bubble of spends to kind of keep up with or catch up with the growth of the town to date? And we need to put some investment in town, big, projects like parks. But then it kind of starts tapering off, right? And so how do we kind of model that from a finance point of view so we're not overtaxing the residents right now, right? And then end up with maybe more than we truly need, right? How do we kind of spread it out over a period of time? Like, so again, like, how do we make the best financial decisions, not only for the town, but also for, our taxpayers, right? That ultimately foot the bill.
Those are perfect questions. And so your policies will guide basically the guardrails that you have on the model. So there's any number of different ways we can put, I would call them restrictions, but put, the guardrails on it so that we know your policy is X. We can calculate that not only this fiscal year, but what might be happening 4 or 5 fiscal years from now. One of the beauties of the model is that because you're able to see far into the future, we'll have to have a number of policies that drive the model. Yeah, one of them was a coverage factor. How low does that fund balance number go before it's too low? We feel it's too much risk. That's usually a function of standing debt to cash at the end of the year. We can calculate all of these policies for you, and then that gives us the ability to not only look at your own policies, but how it might pressure your rating, because we can also track into the future current debt service levels, how much outstanding debt to be outstanding to revenues, looking at their leverage levels for ratings. So we will work with you all on what your current policies are. And we might look at them and say, are those the right policies as we're looking into the future? Do we need to adjust the way we've been looking at that? And that'll all be due to, we'll be able to provide information. Then y'all can all debate among yourselves and say, okay, this is what's kind of determining our affordability factor. Once we can answer is this going to put rating pressure on, we can get past that question, then we can get more into your own local needs. But, the debt affordability model will show, we're living off a budget of X, Y, or Z. And one of your counterparts down the road, they dedicate a certain number of pennies to the debt affordability model. That's just what it is. It's a percentage of the tax levy. And so they know that they live within that type of affordability. But we can put all the guardrails we want with your policies that can be mathematically calculated year over year.
Because, so obviously our policies have worked for us, right? Like we got a good standing AAA rating, healthy debt service and all of that, right? But I'm just wondering if we're restricting ourselves maybe a little bit too much, right? Especially with the growth that is expected from us. Is there more headroom than we're allowing ourselves, and still keep ourselves in good standing with the regulators, the rating agencies, our residents, and so forth.
That conversations you'll be able to have a little bit more in-depth view, because of looking at it in just a single budget year, we're able to look at it in kind of a projection and see where we're heading.
Exactly. We're about to run out of our time. Trying to be sensitive of that since you started late. Andrew, on preliminary insights, talk to them a little bit about
Yeah.
what we already see out of the debt affordability model.
Right, so we've done the first kind of skeleton, we call it version 0, before we really get to the real nitty gritty. But we have some known projects coming. We have the 25 lobs at approximately 19.5 million, the remainder of the geo authorization. And so currently now in that model, these projects are funded with the current resources that we have, but it does show that about 1.5 pennies, I believe that's what was thought about for the 2026 budget. So next budget, that about 1.5 pennies will be brought into the model as well as the current resources, which was about $10 million of current going into the debt service fund from the budget every year. But with that particular assumption of the 1.5 penny, I think a pretty conservative value of what that penny might be. We show that these projects are funded and there's some additional capacity that we could look at into the future. We've come up with a concept in some other places called a steady state. We get you kind of showed, like I said, these are covered, but what can you afford every 2 years without any additional resources needed or without violating the policies that we might have set up. So currently right now, we feel very good about the model, where it's going to sit and where it's kind of coming out. And of course, the utility, the water and sewer side and the electric, they would all have their own separate model that would show what they, so I know you were talking about utility part as well. So these would be 3 different models that would act similarly, but it'd be 4 different types of projects.
So this is already assuming we put all of our, capital expenditures in one bucket, all of our debt service payments in one bucket. So like rolling stock, parks and rec, transportation, all that is kind of already kind of.
Just one thing.
Okay.
What we call general government would be pretty much everything except for utility.
Okay, right.
And I want to say to you that, so far, and then we want to stop talking so y'all can ask more questions. The 1.5 penny helps where we are now, but remember we had a list of other things coming. So we're going to have to look at how we're going to fund those. And when we come back to you, we're going to talk to you more about the steady state. Because in a town that's growing like this one and has future needs, one would hope that we could produce revenues that coming out of a model would give you amount of capacity into the future that you could plan for. And that's called the steady state. I'm going to give, Mr. Mayor, you said you had met him, the city manager of Charlotte, Marcus Jones. We do the work for the city, and he coined the phrase steady state. And every 2 years, the city of Charlotte issues $270 million in bonds out of the revenues they dedicate. And they know that they've got that money. If they need more, they're going to have to find more revenues. We're hoping to find you a method that says, here's what you got. Does that fit your need? If not, how much more we got to put? And with that, I'm not going over the last page. Because we're 48 minutes, I think.
So just, you don't want to cover it, but I do the last page. Like, what's kind of the timeline? Like, what are kind of the concrete next steps, timeline, right? When are we going to have a follow-up conversation? I mean, it sounds very promising. I can understand why, Antoine and the finance team is excited about all this stuff. But how quickly do we make this real, right? That we actually can make it a planning tool that we can, use in next year's budget setting and so forth.
And I just say that you got a new manager. He's doing a great job on this. You got a new financial advisor. You've got great staff that undergirds all of this. But I think we just have to sit down after this meeting today, after we've heard your views, and say, what's next and when should it come? And so it's really not our decision when, it's more how does it work inside your organization. But we had talked about late fall, but we got to make sure that fit The next time we want to come back to you, we want to have more concrete.
And so is that something that we want to kind of take offline, work with the finance committee and kind of do a readout back to council? Or is that something that we want to do as a collective? Like, how do we want to kind of work the space? I guess that's a question for my colleagues here.
I think we have a council here. Also considering Councilman Happy's not here too, so I think it's another meeting to discuss technology that for this side.
I think it's important for, I mean, looking at the bigger projects that we want to make sure we've got accounted for, you know, we've got some big ticket items coming up, so I'd love to be able to get a much stronger number from water, electric, you know, to kind of help us put these substantial projects, because I would anticipate that a lot of our, for lack of a better phrase, our red teaming this is gonna be, all right, what if this project does this? What if this project does this? If we decide we're gonna raise our rates this amount. Because I think that as we look at those major projects, that's gonna, in my opinion, that's gonna drive a lot of my calculation. What adjustments we need to make, because who knows, maybe by the time we get through this exercise, we may say, all right, that fund is not gonna be as large as initially anticipated, simply because of the realities of what we've got to spend.
There's a lot of data gathering that we have to look at and talk about timing with budget and other folks. So it's just going to depend on what is the time.
Another work session.
We've also talked and started getting them on their calendars because they have a lot of retreats, but our retreat in October could be our late fall discussion.
And follow up. So,
And then February after, so
Okay.
October time period, February.
I do have one question. It's probably for Sean and Randy. With regard to our, you know, how we're already started the budgeting process. We'd love to make sure that we're incorporating this within that larger planning iteration, just to make sure we're not.
Yeah, it will be. We had a meeting, internal meeting, staff to, we were talking about projects and where we're headed, what our next steps would be, what our processes. Because we've already had the talk with DC about, they knew this question was coming about capacity and everything else. We've had that conversation, what the numbers, the policy piece looks like. Those are the next steps that they're going to evaluate where we are to make the recommendations on, hey, here's where you could safely be capacity wise. Here's the policies that kind of set those parameters around that capacity. Those are the next things that will come up. And then we figure out which projects fit into that and put those in place. That's the order to get.
And it is a process, folks. I just got to say it to you. It's a process. We're going to have to be next door at town council meeting at 7:00 in Holly Springs. And we've been working on a process like that there with them for over 4 years. And we're still perfecting it. You get the process going and then it changes as data changes, as priority changes. But we're, I want to give you an example of what I want y'all to have because I see it for them as a positive. They just did a big old fund on $100 million park. Y'all know about that, of course. We spent lots of time with the town council saying, what if you do 50? What if you do 70? What if you do 80? What if you do 100? What if you do it in this year? What if you do it in that year? What if you do it in phases? What does all that cost? So to get to that takes time, effort, knowing dollars. So I see this as Andrew said it earlier, it's a living process and it'll take a while to mature it. And then it will need maturing every few years now.
Doug, Andrew, Jeremy, thank you so much for the presentation. We look forward to working with you. Any other questions for them? All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Back at 5:45.
Good to see you. That sounds great. Yeah. I'd say it's my-
No.
Thank you so much. Like that's the kind of stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's in, early October. Have that on our meeting.
10 million rates or 12 million rates.
For other, yeah.
So, right, so I like the.
We got
Right.
Like
Like
again-
to see it's, yeah, sooner rather than later.
Muslim City. City of Charlotte. Nearly 20% of all Australians. So that's only how you have to start the financial.
And I sat
I mean,
down.
yes, we 7%.
And we're gonna work on the policies.
And then like, yeah, are we open? I guess that'll-
I'm absolutely.
If you do 12%.
Mayor and Council, we're excited to talk to you a little bit about street and sidewalk project updates. Kind of the focus tonight is more, we're looking at some of the projects that are newest in our, I guess, coming from the last presentation, freshly activated out of the CIP. So just I've got Adam, our in-house design engineer extraordinaire with us today. And so he's gonna be taking over most of this, but kind of just, again, kind of show you the CIP. You'll notice that the highlighted projects, these are a lot of the projects that we're going to be talking about today. So most of them are either they were starting in last year's CIP or they just got started in this CIP. I think the last one is actually for next year. I'll turn it over to Adam and he'll get into the projects.
So starting off with the sidewalks, so prioritization, planning department and Shannon Cox, Jenna Schaus, they handle the meetings with the schools, the principals, meetings with police, resident requests. So they maintain that prioritization database. And so out of the safe routes priorities, Hughes Street from East Chatham to the community center, and then Mason Street from Eastmore to East Chatham are the top priorities. We held a public open house in February for both of those. So just to look at the typical sections that we're using on both projects. So where we have space on the bottom, a 5-foot standard sidewalk with a 2-foot buffer strip. We're constructing half of our minimum street cross section. So establishing an 11-foot travel lane where currently these are very narrow corridors, looking at 18 feet of pavement. So adding a couple feet of asphalt, and then to minimize the impacts, instead of a standard curb and gutter, we're doing a narrower valley gutter, so just 2 feet wide. And then where we have constraints on both projects, whether it's a physical feature or vegetation, mature trees, we are bringing the sidewalk into the valley gutter, which the standard when we have it against the valley gutter is that 6-foot width. And then even constructing some header curbs where it benefits us and minimizes that grading that's needed.
Is this, because we're doing this slightly differently here, is that going to go back to stormwater?
No.
Some of these areas don't even have a ditch today, and if they do, it would really be just changing it to a curb and gutter in areas where you got sites will be put underground system.
Are you concerned about capacity, stormwater?
Yeah.
Yeah, typically, this is a big improvement on frontages where they're inundated currently. In a lot of cases, Chris said, there is no swale of any kind in a lot of these areas. So it relieves all that because the standard is the sidewalk is sloped to the street. So everything from back of sidewalk is now contained within the street drainage.
And sorry,
yeah.
your previous slide, like, are the two concepts both being implemented?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll say maybe 50-50 is how it's kind of fallen out just based on the impacts. But then a rendering, some of these renderings we used at the open house, give an idea to the folks what it might look like. So this is Center Street to the senior center. And there it's really tight, the existing fence, that last parcel. So we're bringing the sidewalk up against the gutter.
Hey,
And
Adam,
south. Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Can you speak to the how the one you just showed, how that will interact with the gate at the senior center, or whether that needs to be reevaluated?
We are routing, we're completing a pedestrian route to the senior center. The gate, I believe, crosses the road.
Yeah, I think there's still room to get a pedestrian through there. I guess it is up to council's discretion. We have had people call that have asked, could that gate be open permanently? And so I guess that is always something that could be considered. But as far as pedestrians, we can continue to use the sidewalk and get by.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I was in favor of having the gate open at the time, and I still am now. And I think when we're doing these improvements, I think we should have a discussion as a council about that personally. Thanks.
Actually, if I could to that, what has the responsibility from the community members that are impacted by that sidewalk, like not AK, but Jordan Oil?
It's been mixed. I don't know if you talk to people from Jordan.
No, not specifically about this project. One resident on that block had concerns about that truck traffic. His property is on the opposite side of Houston. He's not being directly impacted, but he did make that comment, concerned about the truck ingress, egress, and pedestrians. I imagine it's pretty slow moving in and out there at the end. So
I think his concern was more, there's already a crosswalk, like kind of 100 feet down at Mason Street, right? Will there be another crosswalk kind of at U Street as well, right? To connect the two sidewalks, or, you know, like how's that kind of going to work? And then, you know, along the street, I think we're fine with the sidewalk and the truck traffic obviously being in the roadway, but kind of what is that intersection of Center Street and U's going to look like?
we would not plan to mark a crosswalk on Center.
On the signal. Yeah.
We would not plan to mark it. I think our the safety engineer, Sajid, did a study, and at this time, it wouldn't be warranted. We'd build the project and then, of course, revisit and add one when it's warranted.
To be adding a crosswalk across Center Street, which is, I believe, signalized, or where is it?
Right, not there.
One more block up.
One more block up. Yeah, basically it's signals, but provide the accessibility, but we want to make people feel that they're safe when there's not a signal, there's stop cars.
So again, the rendering on South Mason, this is the lower block, Eastmore to Olive, looking north. There's actually this parcel to the south, southeast corner, existing sidewalk, and we would go behind the existing hardwood trees and tie to it. And then to the north, Olive Street to Chatham, a bit more room there. So we'd have the 2-foot buffer strip without a lot of impacts. Jones Street improvements, public open house we held in conjunction with Justice Heights Street Extension in June. And so look at the typical section there. Again, an 18-foot existing pavement. We'll be adding 2 feet widening on each side and a 6-foot sidewalk on the east side. And this will be our standard valley gutter, 2.5 feet wide on each side. Then a rendering. This is Chatham looking towards Holloman. Kind of sort of what it might look like.
Yeah, in a lot of these engineers have tools or tools and like to play as well, but we've been trying to try out some new software technology that we've had to try to help with the public outreach. So this was stuff that really allow people that are not engineers when we're out meeting public to really get a sense of what it's going to actually look like. So not everything's to scale, of course. Driveways won't be that steep, but gives you some idea.
For John Street, that was just sidewalks.
Correct. East side only, right. And then Justice Heights Street Extension, which involves extending the existing road to the Peakway, multi-use path extending to the north to connect to existing, and then sidewalk on the south side of the existing street to Gumdrop Path. And then typical section there. So the extension, and I did catch a typo, the minimum right-of-way width is actually 60 feet, showing 50 there. 5-foot sidewalks on each side, it's a minor collector, and showing variable width pavement. When we approach the Peakway, we have laid out an exclusive right turn lane and then a through left. And then, sorry.
No, go ahead, finish.
For the existing, it's a ton of pavement out there. It's 35 feet of asphalt, so way more than we need. So we're proposing to do a bit of a road diet and construct that sidewalk on the south side within the footprint of where the existing valley gutter is. So the impacts on those frontages would be minimal.
It was an older cross section that we don't use anymore.
And we
So are
have
we talking about the entire length of Justice Heights now?
two gumdrop path. So where we construct that sidewalk from the Peakway along the extension all the way east to Gumdrop Path. So rendering on that south side where we would be taking out, doing demo of the existing gutter and pavement.
Got an animation too.
I think this has result. If I leave it long enough, that won't take too long. We got some dimensions on there. There'll still be enough room for 10-foot travel lanes plus, say, an extra 4 feet each side for parking, and then of course the gutter. Go with that. Or maybe it's not going to do it. It did it for me. Schedules, looking to finish up design. We've already completed preliminary design on all of those. So finish up design this calendar year, right of way into the first half of next year. And then we should be able to construct the first 3 by the end of next year. Justice Heights extension might extend into the following year. And then lastly, the Peakway North widening. So this is Center Street to Old Raleigh Road, existing 2 lanes with a super wide median and bike lanes. And this is a street view look looking north from the southern end, the Center Street ends. So we have contracted with Kissinger, Campo and Associates to complete a feasibility study. They are to come up with 2 alternatives, a symmetrical and an asymmetrical option. There are a few challenges. This is the standard typical for the Peakway, our current standard. What's out there now is a 23-foot median. Our standard's 18. So they're going to help us figure out what makes the most sense. Are we maintaining those curb lines of the median and expanding out? Does it make more sense to hold a curb line on one side or the other and reconstruct? And then, of course, we feel like we're going to have to construct this under traffic. We're not going to be able to shut this down.
Yeah, a lot of vehicles on there.
So tentative schedule, feasibility this fall, design and public outreach next year, followed by property acquisition in 26 and final design and potentially construction in 27. So some challenges, the big one, other than just dealing with that old typical section that's not like anything else in town, the property on the northeast corner of Center and Peakway 807 Center, that may turn into a take of the entire track. The building is super close, and I think they made some adjustments with that original project just to avoid that building. Old Mill Village frontage, the townhomes, there's existing buffers, trees, probably looking at retaining walls to minimize that encroachment. There is a stream crossing on this corridor, and then, of course, just the transitions on each end, widening this one section. That's all we had to talk about.
Can I go back to the,
We weren't planning to, it wasn't like a recommendation or anything, but it was more to make sure that you guys are understanding where we're at on these projects as they start out. We got a lot of other projects that are a little bit further along that are either in right away. We've had outreach on most of these other than the last one. But when we start moving further into design, moving into acquisition, we didn't want you all to be surprised by any inquiries you may receive from anybody out in the community. I think most of the projects that we saw for the sidewalks and the 2 street projects were mostly positive.
Yes.
Feedback in the meetings. So there's always a few that are opposed, but mostly it was positive. But yeah.
And sorry, we're making exceptions to our standards, particularly on the sidewalk projects, to minimize those impacts, to get it just as tight as we can. We've even talked about bidding an alternate for some boardwalk to have that. Sometimes, you lay it out on paper, but then you get out in the field, you start staking it and realize the roots were really impacting here. We realize that. then we can make adjustments on the fly and maybe use some boardwalk to mitigate those tree root impacts.
Can I go back to the North U streets for a moment? So we just said there's not going to be a crosswalk, or a marked crosswalk there. I'm just looking at an aerial map. So if there's going to be a sidewalk on the one side of Center Street, and then it picks up again on the other side of Center Street, running into Town Hall, but there's no crosswalk there. There's also no sidewalk on that north side of the road, right? So how would people actually get to that section of sidewalk between Center Street and Town Hall? But there's, because the signaled intersection at Mason Street is not going to help us there, because unless we put another sidewalk along Center Street. So there's really no way for people to get there, like, unless we build a crosswalk as part of the project, or say, mark it at least.
Is the main concern north-south or connections east-west from you?
So like, it's kind of like an orphan piece of sidewalk, right? Because there's no connectivity to any other sidewalk on Center Street.
We are connecting, this is connecting at the south end of the job. It's getting a connection that will go from the middle school all the way to the center. So
You're asking why would we not mark a crosswalk?
I'm talking about U Street, right?
Yeah.
So North U Street is a piece between Center Street. So let's just, there is no connection to that sidewalk on Center Street. Right, so how are people gonna get to that piece of that piece of sidewalk?
the scope for this project was to provide the link between the south to the north. So we could look at Center Street, but that was never part of the scope. It was to get the connection as a safe routes to school project from the middle school to the senior center, because they had a lot of traffic running north-south.
But if we're not having a crosswalk, right?
Exactly.
How are the kids gonna cross Center Street and where?
Yeah, I mean, if I put my traffic hat on, it's an accessible crossing. We could put a crosswalk there, but it's just not typically recommended.
Accessible crossing how?
Well, like curb ramps and it's sidewalk, so you don't have to have a marked crosswalk in order to cross there. You're providing a crossing, but it's an unmarked crossing. So you can always mark it, we can, but it's typically frowned upon when you either don't have a beacon or a signal, or you actually have that visual.
And so, especially in context of safe routes to school, right? We're talking kids, like now we're asking kids to cross over Center Street in an unmarked crossing, right? That just doesn't feel right to me. Like if that's the case, if that's the deal, then I'd rather have them stay on Mason Street and use the signal intersection and walk along Mason Street, and then, enter at the John Brown Community Center instead of through U Street, because that is a marked signal intersection, which is going to be a heck of a lot safer than kids running across Center Street in an unmarked location. Right.
And we add complication to that, if we have gas trucks coming in and out of this place all the time. We are also adding them crossing in front of these trucks. That was part of the reason why expanding this and opening this was something I was against, because having pedestrian traffic crossing that and cars interfering with a lot of the gas and oil parts that come through there is such a big safety risk. So, the street is small, it's not a big area. So I tend to agree with Arno in this case, that if we're not gonna have connections and crosswalks, just as safe as possible, and we have the interference of those big trucks that are coming through there, to keep it on Mason instead.
To eliminate that northern block.
What if it was to have a beacon installed? Would that change?
I mean, and at that point, we might as well paint a line on the street too, right? So yeah,
No,
like,
it would.
right.
But what I'm saying is we typically don't do them. We don't typically just put the crosswalk alone, because you're putting crosswalk across a street that doesn't have a stop sign or signal.
So
I
you
guess
could
my,
put
my,
in
my,
flashing
my
beacons, but-
request is, please take a look at this, right? And then like kind of assess like, okay, people coming off of the south end of North U Street, right? How are you gonna get across the street? Or if they're coming up from Mason Street and want to kind of take the cut over, right? How are they gonna get there, and safely cross Center Street, right? I think it either implies we're gonna have to do something along Center Street to build that connection between Mason and U. Or we need, some sort of a crosswalk, signalized, whatever is required in order to cross at North U Street from the south side to the north side.
There is sidewalks between Mason and Hughes.
But on the south side of the road,
Right.
right? So how are you gonna get across Center Street? Because you can cross at Mason, right, at the signalized intersection and then take the cut over. So you would need to do something on the north side of Center Street in order to make that connection.
Hey, Arno, I'm a fan of thinking about that crossing of Center Street and making it safer. My reaction to what you and Audra just said, though, is that my understanding is kids are walking that now in the street. And especially the gas truck comment, walking on a sidewalk up that part of Hughes instead of in the street is safer, I would think.
I'm not suggesting I'm against building that sidewalk, Brad, right? It's like, I like the idea of, because you're right, it's like, there's, and especially when we have festivals and whatnot, right? People use North U Street all the time to get into Town Hall campus. And so to build that sidewalk makes sense, right? I just want to make sure that we think through the connective tissue here that we seem to be missing right now.
So you're just wanting to make sure that there's another connection along Center on the north side.
Either we do a crosswalk at U Street, right? So you come up U Street, you just go straight across, but there's a marked crosswalk with, beacons if we think we need them, right? Or if we don't want to do a crosswalk there because it's too close to Mason Street, then we got to figure out how to cross at Mason and then, connect to use.
In other words, both of them.
I mean, it's essentially just, figure out the way to make that crossing safer. Beacon,
Yeah.
crosswalk.
I think we could certainly look at putting in the beacon with a crosswalk. I think that the addition of, obviously, Center Street's got sidewalk on one side already. You got a lot of streets that have no sidewalk on either side. So that's probably why it wasn't already in the scope to put another one on Center, because we already had it on the south side, but sure.
Anything else? Thanks for the update, the presentation, of course.
Oh, one quick question. Property acquisition. So we're not looking at that for at least the other year.
Well, these projects, many of them are, because they're relatively narrow in scope. And none of them are on the LAP program, which tend to drag on. So it probably
within the next 12 months.
It will not take
Like
long
complete.
to get these to acquisition.
Okay, that makes sense. All right.
I would not be surprised if these are built before the LAP projects, just because of how, even though those are ahead of these,
It's just, I want
there's too many touch points, and we've been waiting months just on the other two sidewalks that he's got, just to get the appraisals approved by DOT, not just to let it start talking to each other.
just trying to get a sense of things.
It probably wouldn't be more than a few more months, right? Why here?
That's kind of what I was thinking. Probably start getting-
Before Christmas.
That just as an extension, that may help with the construction of the P-way project, traffic and installation.
Sure.
Yeah. We're gonna get feedback on that too.
Yeah.
Well,
It was actually,
we had very low turnout at the public open house, and the key owners, we're only dealing with one owner with the extension. They were the only ones that showed up. And they were Yeah.
Yeah, I canvas, just a site. Talk about. Right, y'all wanna hang out another 15 minutes?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. Okay. All right, no further business, all right, we adjourn, thank you. Brad.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
I'm just,